to put her in her place on her very wedding day. The foster family's hotel remained tightly shut for 5 long hours. Chloe sat inside the bridal car, counting every single second while listening to the mocking laughter echoing from outside. The 72 dowry trunks her father had meticulously prepared sat baking under the scorching July sun for those exact 5 hours. She was supposed to marry into the foster family with the utmost honor. Yet, she had instead become the laughingstock of the entire city of Bayview. She waited until the very last second of the 5th hour before tearing off her bridal veil, pushing the car door open, and stepping out. "The wedding is off," she declared. "Pack everything up and take it all back." The tightly closed doors of the hotel finally swung open the exact moment the words left her mouth. But the bridal car had already turned around to head home, sending shock waves through all of Bayview. When the bridal car pulled up to the main entrance of the Regent Hotel, the sun was positioned directly overhead. The July heat was brutal, intense enough to feel as though it could melt the asphalt right off the street. Chloe rolled down the car window for just a brief moment, and sweat immediately began trickling down her chin. Outside, the wedding band abruptly stopped playing right in the middle of a song, followed by a flurry of rustling footsteps. The wedding coordinator's voice was hushed to a low whisper, but she could still hear every word perfectly clearly. CEO Foster said to tell the bride to wait in the car for a moment. "The banquet hall isn't fully decorated yet." Not fully decorated. The wedding date had been set 5 months ago. The traditional betrothal arrangements had been finalized just last month. And only yesterday the Fosters had repeatedly confirmed every single detail of the schedule. Now they were telling her it wasn't decorated yet. Chloe tightly gripped the velvet pouch in her hands, remaining silent. Outside, her assistant, Amy, grew anxious, her voice cracking with frustration. "What is that supposed to mean? Imagine being tested to the wedding day." This bride's silence, and a brilliant plan to turn the tables completely. Let's dive into her incredible story of taking back control. The coordinator let out a forced, awkward laugh. "Don't rush. CEO Foster is tied up with some urgent business. Just wait a little longer, and everything will be fine." Through the car window, Chloe spoke up calmly. "It's fine. We'll wait." Amy choked back her words. Chloe could hear her assistant stamping her feet outside, though she didn't dare stomp too hard. In reality, Chloe knew better than anyone else what was truly happening. The unfinished decorations and the urgent business were nothing but a facade. Vance Foster was clearly trying to put her in her place. He was sending her a message. So what if she was the heiress of the wealthy Sterling family? Once she married into the Foster family, she had to bow her head and learn her place. From the very moment she crossed their threshold, her dignity was meant to be trampled beneath his feet. Chloe placed the velvet pouch onto her lap and closed her eyes. If that was the case, then she would wait. She wanted to see exactly how long he intended to leave her out here baking in the sun. By the 1st hour, the crowd of onlookers outside the hotel had grown progressively larger. The Regent Hotel was located right in the heart of Bayview's primary commercial district, and the sheer scale of this wedding setup was exceptionally grand. Chloe's father was widely known for doting on his daughter, and for this occasion, he had prepared 72 dowry trunks transported all the way from the old Sterling estate with white silk ribbons stretching across half the street. Everyone who was anyone in Bayview's high society knew exactly what those sandalwood chests contained. The very first trunk held a flawless set of pigeon blood ruby jewelry, a rare collector set acquired from the exclusive by S showroom, boasting a color far more vibrant than the Foster family's own heirloom pieces. The 8th trunk contained the deeds to 3 floors of prime office space in the city center, yielding an annual rental income well into 8 figures. From the 20th trunk onward, the chests were filled entirely with real estate deeds for properties in major metropolitan cities and private equity fund shares. The final few trunks held rare books preserved by Chloe's late mother, alongside oil paintings she had painted with her own hands. While these final items might not have commanded the highest market value, to Chloe they carried more weight than anything else. At this very moment, those 72 dowry trunks were lined up neatly across the plaza in front of the hotel, bearing the merciless brunt of the blazing July sun. Chloe overheard whispers rippling through the crowd outside. It's been nearly an hour. Why hasn't the Foster family let them in yet? Oh, haven't you heard? CEO Foster never wanted to marry Chloe Sterling in the first place. This marriage was forced upon them by the grandfathers of both families. Even so, they shouldn't treat her like this, leaving 72 dowry trunks out in the sun. Whose face are they trying to slap? The Sterling's face, obviously. CEO Foster is making it crystal clear to all of Bayview that the Sterling family's daughter isn't even worth him coming out to personally receive. Her nails dug deep into the palms of her hands. Amy's voice drifted in from outside the window, carrying a choked sob. Mississippi, I'm calling the chairman. Don't call him, Chloe ordered. But I said don't call him. If her father found out what was happening in the plaza today, it would inevitably blow up into a massive incident. Given his fiery temper, he would probably barge right in with his men and drag Vance Foster out by force. And then what? They would have a massive public fallout, completely destroying the collaborative project between their two families. The Sterling Corporation's stock would plummet, and the entire game would be lost. Vance Foster had grasped this exact point perfectly. He knew she wouldn't dare make a scene, knew the Sterling family wouldn't easily call off the wedding, and knew the hundreds of millions tied up in their joint project were hanging over her head. Therefore, she could only obediently endure this humiliation. Chloe took a deep breath, clutching the bloody, crescent-shaped marks in her palms even tighter. Fine, fine. She would keep waiting. By the second hour, the world beneath her bridal veil grew increasingly suffocating. Her lips were already dry, cracked, and peeling. Amy slipped a bottle of cold water through the crack in the car window, but Chloe pushed it right back out. If she lifted her veil to drink the water, by tomorrow all of Bayview would be gossiping that the Sterling family's heiress couldn't wait any longer and had lifted her own veil. They would say she had no manners and was too desperate to marry into the Foster family. Secondly, this was exactly what Vance Foster wanted. He wanted her to lose her composure first, to embarrass herself. Then he could justifiably point fingers and say, look, the Sterling family's upbringing is nothing more than this. No, she absolutely refused to give him that satisfaction. The chatter outside grew louder by the minute. It was no longer hushed whispers, but open, blatant mockery. 2 hours already. This Sterling family, 72 dowry trunks. The silk ribbons on that jewelry chest are already peeling from the sun. If Chairman Sterling knew his daughter was being left to bake at the hotel entrance for 2 hours, he'd probably be so furious he'd end up in the hospital. Even if he knew. So what? The project has already launched. They couldn't pull out even if they wanted to. They just have to swallow it. Then, an especially grating voice pierced through the noise. A shrill woman's voice carrying a hint of amusement. Oh my, it's not that CEO Foster doesn't want to open the doors. He has a guest inside. I heard that Miss Blake went into CEO Foster's lounge this morning and still hasn't left. Lauren Blake, Vance Foster's childhood sweetheart. Everyone in their circle knew that Vance only had one woman in his heart, Lauren. Had Lauren's father's company not gone bankrupt, leaving them drowning in massive debt and no longer a suitable match for the Foster family, this marriage would never have fallen to Chloe in the first place. Therefore, in Vance Foster's eyes, Chloe was nothing but an opportunist thief who had swooped in and stolen the position that rightfully belonged to Lauren. Chloe could hear Amy trembling with rage outside, her teeth grinding together audibly. Miss Chloe didn't say a word because she was counting the time. From the very moment the bridal car stopped, she had been counting every minute and every second in her head. She had set a limit for herself. 5 hours. This was her absolute bottom line. Not a moment more, not a moment less. If he opened the doors within 5 hours, she would walk in and this marriage would proceed as normal. She would accept it. But if 5 hours passed and he still hadn't opened the doors, then he couldn't blame her for what came next. The 6th hour. The sun had begun its descent toward the west. Yet the scorching heat hadn't lessened in the slightest. On the contrary, it was so stiflingly humid that it made it hard to breathe. Beneath her wedding dress, Chloe was completely drenched. Sweat soaked through the fabric, making the lace cling tightly to her skin, sticky and unbearably itchy. As the hem of her veil fluttered before her eyes, she could see her own hands tightly clasped over her knees, her knuckles completely white with dark bruises forming beneath her fingernails. The crowd outside had stopped laughing. They had grown quiet. That silence was even more suffocating than their mocking laughter. It was the kind of silence that comes when people have had their fill of the spectacle and begin to transition into pity. Chloe didn't need their pity. Amy's voice had gone hoarse. She had likely been crying. Mississippi, the estate, has asked 3 times already. I've blocked them all. Please, I'm begging you. Let's just go home. It's not time yet. Chloe replied, Mississippi, I said it's not time yet. She stared at a corner of the pearl brooch peeking out from the pouch. The brooch was what her mother had worn when she got married all those years ago. Before passing away, her mother had pressed it into Chloe's hand and told her, Chloe, I don't ask for you to have vast wealth and riches. I only wish for you to have a smooth life and a harmonious marriage. Her mother had died young, and this brooch was the very last thing she had left her. At that moment, the surface of the pearl was stained with Chloe's sweat, its luster blurring and spreading into a hazy patch. She tried to wipe it away with her thumb, but it wouldn't come clean. The countdown for the 5th hour was ticking away. Every single second dropped in her mind, growing fewer and fewer. Then she heard a voice drifting out from behind the tightly shut main doors of the hotel. It was a woman's laughter, gentle and tinged with a coquettish whine. Vance, are you really not going out to receive her? After all, it is an arranged marriage between the 2 families. Leaving her out in the sun for too long won't look good. This was followed by Vance Foster's nonchalant voice, which even carried a hint of amusement. What's the rush? Let her wait a little longer. What does it matter if the Sterling family suffers for a few hours? If she can't even endure this little bit of hardship, it's best she goes home early so she doesn't become an eyesore in the Foster household. Once we're married and the Sterling Corporation's funds hit the account, there will be plenty of ways to keep her and the Sterling family on a tight leash. Lauren Blake laughed again. You're so bad. You only know how to bully people. From inside the doors came the crisp clearing of coffee cups touching. He had left her baking outside the doors for nearly 5 hours. That while he was inside with another woman, sitting in the air conditioning and sipping coffee. Chloe's hand froze. She stopped wiping. The moisture on the brooch had completely smeared into a blurry streak of pearlescent light. Staring at that pale gray-white streak, she suddenly felt incredibly calm, even calmer than she could have ever imagined. There was no more pain, no more feeling wronged. There was nothing left at all. She finished counting the very last second in her head. The 5 hours were up. She tore off her bridal veil without a single moment of hesitation. Folding the white veil, she placed it onto the seat of the bridal car. The harsh sunlight outside suddenly pierced her vision. She squinted for a moment, then opened her eyes. Amy stood outside the car in a daze, her eyes swollen red like walnuts. Seeing Chloe tear off the veil, her jaw dropped, unable to form a single word. The crowd of onlookers also fell dead silent. Everyone was staring at her. Chloe stood up, the train of her wedding dress dragging across the car's floor mats. She bent down, lifted the hem of her gown, and stepped firmly out of the bridal car. The moment her feet touched the plaza's paving stones, a searing heat transferred right through the soles of her shoes. It was so hot that her toes curled instinctively, but she stood completely straight. She looked around at the dowry trunks lined up in long rows beneath the sun. The workers hired to carry the dowry were squatting by the side of the road. A few of them, suffering from heat exhaustion, were clutching bottles of mineral water and gulping them down. She took it all in, then turned to face the main doors of the hotel. The doors remained tightly shut. The red double happiness paper cutouts taped to the glass doors had curled at the edges from the blistering sun. She took a deep breath and spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for every single person present to hear distinctly. The wedding is off. The entire scene was pin-drop silent. It was a deathly stillness. Even the sound of traffic on the adjacent street seemed to grind to a halt. Take all 72 dowry trunks back to the Sterling estate on the exact route we came. Not a single item is to be left behind. Amy's legs turned to jelly, nearly dropping her to her knees. Mississippi, didn't you hear? Chloe looked at her. Tell them to move it. Amy had been by her side for 8 years. She understood her perfectly. She turned around and shouted at the stunned workers. What are you all standing around for? Move it. Take it all back. The workers looked at each other, not daring to make a move. Chloe's voice dropped to a freezing tone. These belongings belong to the Sterling family, not the Fosters. Are you going to move them or not? The first trunk was hoisted up, followed by the second, then the fifth. The dowry procession began to move, reversing back down the exact street they had come from. The crowd erupted. Oh my God, she called off the wedding. Miss Sterling is refusing the marriage. This is a marriage tied to hundreds of millions in project investments. 5 hours. 5 whole hours. Who could possibly stand that in her shoes? We've got quite a show to watch now, just as the first few dowry trunks, just as the final dowry trunks were being hoisted up. The hotel's main entrance swung open. The heavy glass doors were shoved hard from the inside, the hinges letting out a jarring, grating sound. Vance Foster stood in the doorway, dressed in a custom-tailored black suit, a handcrafted belt cinching his waist. He possessed a tall, elegant figure, exuding the authority of someone who had occupied a high position for a long time. At this moment, the expression on his face was quite something. He likely hadn't expected her to actually dare to call off the wedding directly. His gaze swept over the procession of dowry trunks being carried away, his brows knitting together tightly as he looked toward her. Chloe Sterling, have you lost your mind? Chloe stood beside the bridal car, the sweat stains on her wedding dress shimmering faintly under the sunlight. She gave him a single glance, then turned and walked toward the Sterling family's private car parked by the roadside. She turned her back on him, turned her back on the hotel, turned her back on all the onlookers. Miss Sterling, CEO Foster's calling you. The wedding coordinator behind her shouted, so anxious he was practically jumping up and down. But she didn't stop. Amy steadied her arm. Her own hand was trembling, but she followed closely behind. Behind them, Vance Foster's voice came chasing, laced with anger and disbelief. Chloe Sterling, you stand right there. This marriage was arranged by both our families. You just say it's off, and it's off. Who do you think you are? Chloe stopped. It wasn't because of what he said, but because she remembered something. She turned around looking at him from halfway across the plaza. He stood before the hotel entrance, and behind him, the main doors were flung wide. Dimly, she could see the silhouette of Lauren Blake inside. Lauren was hiding behind a pillar, half of her head peeking out, her expression shifting from shock to panic. Chloe looked at Vance Foster and suddenly laughed. CEO Foster, 5 hours. She held up 3 fingers. You left me out here on this plaza, in front of all of Bayview, baking for a full 5 hours. You were inside with another woman, enjoying the air conditioning and drinking coffee, while you left me sitting in the stuffy car, not even daring to take a sip of water. You said I was an eyesore to you. She lowered her hand. Fine. With these eyes from now on, I won't be an eyesore anymore. After speaking, she got into the car. The moment the door closed, she heard the entire street erupt into chaos, accompanied by Vance Foster's low roar. Chloe Sterling, the car sped away, the tires crushed over the asphalt, crushed over the threshold that symbolized the Foster family's pride in front of the hotel. Chloe took a wet towel from her bag and handed it to Amy to wipe away her sweat. After we get back, inventory the dowry. Not a single item can be missing. Then, send an email to all our channels on my behalf. Amy asked, send what? Miss, the Sterling Corporation is terminating all cooperation with the Foster Group. Furthermore, under the name of Sterling Holdings. suspend all lines of credit to the Foster group. As the car drove into the side gate of the old Sterling estate, Amy sat beside her, wanting to speak several times, but hesitating. Chloe didn't give her the chance to open her mouth. Before getting out of the car, she calmly instructed, "Within half an hour, send all the details of the Foster Group's collaboration projects and the Sterling Holdings credit facility documents to my email. Notify the legal department to draft a termination notice and send it to the Foster Group headquarters before the end of the day. As for the public explanation, keep it unified. The wedding is canceled. No further comments." Amy nodded vigorously, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. She had been with Chloe for 8 years, always by her side since the founding of Sterling Holdings. She had seen Chloe's decisive and ruthless side in the capital markets, and she had also seen her play the role of the gentle, obedient heiress. She knew very well that once Chloe spoke, there was no turning back. The old estate was very quiet. Chloe's father was in his study handling work affairs, still completely unaware of the earth-shattering events that had just unfolded outside. Chloe didn't go to see him right away. Instead, she returned to her own courtyard, changed out of her sweat-drenched wedding dress, and washed her face with cold water. The woman staring back from the mirror had a pale complexion, but her eyes gleamed with a sharp, icy coldness, a stark contrast to her usual gentle and obedient demeanor. 3 years ago, when she took over Sterling Holdings, Chloe had crafted 2 distinct personas for herself. One was the pampered, legitimate daughter of the Sterling family, gentle, understanding, and the radiant jewel her father cherished in the palm of his hand. The other persona was the mastermind controlling the conglomerate from the shadows, low profile, ruthless, and striking with absolute finality, leaving her opponents with absolutely no way out. The marriage to the Foster family had originally been her father's idea. Chloe had initially figured that although Vance Foster was cold, his capabilities weren't bad. A marriage alliance between their 2 families would be mutually beneficial. So, she had been perfectly willing to play along and act the part of the dutiful, virtuous daughter-in-law. It was just a pity that he was too eager to put her in her place and far too stupid. Her phone buzzed. It was the documents Amy had sent. Chloe sat at her desk, pulled up the Foster Group's financial reports, and skimmed her fingertips over every line of data. Over the past 2 years, the Foster Group had expanded entirely too fast. Their capital chain was stretched as tight as a bowstring pulled to this collaboration with the Sterling Corporation, combined with the hidden credit lines quietly funneled through Sterling Holdings, was the only lifeline keeping his company breathing. Her fingertip tapped lightly against the screen. She sent 2 words to the chief risk officer of Sterling Holdings. "Stop everything." Those 2 words pronounced a death sentence for the Foster Group. Meanwhile, back at the Regent Hotel, the scene had long since devolved into a chaotic mess. Vance Foster stood at the empty entrance, staring at the empty plaza, his face as dark as ink. Lauren Blake approached from behind and carefully tugged at his sleeve. "Vance, please don't be mad. Miss Sterling is probably just throwing a tantrum. Girls are sensitive about their pride. Being left out in the sun for that long, it's inevitable she'd act out a bit." Vance Foster's voice was so cold it practically dripped with ice. "A tantrum." She called off the wedding in front of everyone and slapped the Foster family in the face. "You call that a tantrum?" In his 29 years of life, he had always been the one people catered to and obeyed. No one had ever dared to humiliate him like this. Chloe Sterling, a spoiled heiress who relied entirely on her family's backing, had actually dared to give him the cold shoulder. She'd even dared to haul her dowry back home. He pulled out his phone and called Chloe. He called her 5 times in a row, only for every call to be instantly rejected. When he tried again, her phone was already turned off. "Fine, very well." Vance Foster ground his teeth, a storm of fury brewing in his eyes. "I want to see just how long she can play tough. Without the Foster family, can the Sterling Corporation's project even stay afloat? I'll just wait and see how she explains this to her father." He was absolutely certain that Chloe had acted on a momentary impulse. He was certain her father would force her to come crawling back to apologize, and certain that this entire charade would end with her bowing her head and admitting her mistakes. After all, in his eyes, the Sterling family needed a favor from the Foster family. Chloe marrying him was the Sterling family marrying up. Standing beside him, Lauren Blake lowered her eyelashes, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk curving the corners of her mouth. This was exactly the outcome she had been aiming for. She had deliberately shown up at the hotel first thing in the morning. She had deliberately instigated Vance into asserting his dominance over Chloe, and she had deliberately spoken those words behind the doors, all to push Chloe to the breaking point, so she would make a scene. As long as Chloe made a scene, the ones losing face would be the Sterling family, and Vance Foster would only despise Chloe even more. Once the marriage was completely ruined, she could slowly coax Vance back into her arms, and one day she would secure the position of Mrs. Foster for herself. She had accurately calculated Chloe's pride, just as she had accurately calculated Vance Foster's arrogance. But there was one thing she had grossly miscalculated. Chloe was absolutely not some frail heiress who needed to rely on her family. At 300 that afternoon, the Foster Group's finance department was the first to explode. Their partnered banks suddenly announced a tightening of credit lines, abruptly halting 2 impending loan disbursements. Immediately after, their 3 core upstream suppliers simultaneously sent demand letters requiring full payment of all outstanding debts within 3 days, threatening to cut off supplies if they failed to comply. Vance Foster was in the middle of an emergency meeting discussing how to handle the public fallout of the canceled wedding when his chief financial officer barged in, his face deathly pale. CEO Foster, we're in trouble. The capital chain has snapped. Vance Foster shot to his feet. What happened? Didn't you say the Sterling Corporation's funds would hit our accounts next week? It's not just the Sterling Corporation. The CFO's voice trembled. Sterling Holdings also halted all bridge loans and credit lines. The short-term financing we received previously was actually all funneled by Sterling Holdings through third-party channels. Now that they've suddenly pulled their capital, the cash on our books isn't even enough to pay off our suppliers. Sterling Holdings. Vance Foster furrowed his brows tightly. He had heard this name before. It was a conglomerate that had risen aggressively over the past 2 years. Their methods were ruthless, their investments deadly accurate. Yet very few people had ever met the boss behind the scenes. He couldn't wrap his head around it. The Foster Group and Sterling Holdings had no grudges or enmity. Why would they suddenly strike? Investigate this for me right now. Vance Foster slammed his fist onto the conference table, making the water glasses rattle. Find out why Sterling Holdings is suddenly pulling their capital. After the meeting adjourned, his executive assistant rushed in, tightly clutching a stack of documents. His face looked even worse than the CFO's. CEO Foster, we found out the actual controller of Sterling Holdings is Chloe Sterling. Vance Foster froze for a few seconds, thinking he had misheard. What did you just say? The founder and sole actual controller of Sterling Holdings is Chloe Sterling. The executive assistant's voice was hoarse. She used offshore companies to hold the shares and hid it incredibly well. We couldn't trace it at all before. Not only that, but the financial backers we were negotiating with this time all have ties to Sterling Holdings behind the scenes. In other words, the Foster Group's lifeline has been in her hands from the very beginning. Impossible. Vance Foster took a step back, leaning against his desk, his mind buzzing. In his eyes, the Sterling family's heiress was gentle, weak, and reliant on her family. How could she possibly be the boss of Sterling Holdings, controlling hundreds of billions in capital? He suddenly recalled her demeanor at the wedding, standing in the plaza in her sweat-drenched wedding dress. Her back had been perfectly straight when she said the wedding was off. Her voice was calm, without a single ripple of emotion. That wasn't a wealthy heiress throwing a tantrum. That was a person in power issuing a command. He thought he had her by the throat, but in reality, she was the one controlling the chessboard. A massive sense of absurdity and panic instantly seized him. The lifeline he thought he had secured was something he had pushed away with his own hands. The marriage he thought was her marrying up was actually something the Foster family wasn't even worthy of. "Prepare the car," Vance Foster ordered. Picking up his suit jacket, his voice carried a subtle, barely discernible trace of panic. To the old Sterling estate. He arrived at the Sterling estate at 500 in the afternoon. The gate guards reported his arrival, and the person who came down to meet him was the butler. The butler bowed with practiced politeness. "CEO Foster, the miss says she is tired and will not be seeing guests. Regarding the wedding, our legal department will contact you from now on." Tired, Vance Foster suppressed his roaring anger. She calls off the wedding first, and now she's hiding and refusing to see anyone. Tell her to come out. I have things to say to her. The miss says there is nothing worth discussing. The butler's tone remained politely unchanged. Please leave, CEO Foster. Furthermore, the termination letter from the Sterling Corporation should have already been delivered to your office. Vance Foster clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging into his palms. In his 29 years, this was the very first time he had been shut out and rejected at someone's door like this. If it were in the past, he would have flicked his sleeves and stormed off long ago. But he couldn't do that now. The Foster Group's lifeline was in her hands. He couldn't leave. Fine, I will wait here. He stood beneath the shade of a tree, speaking in a low voice. I will wait until she is willing to see me. On that July afternoon, the sun had not yet set, and the residual heat baked everything until it was scorchingly hot. Vance Foster stood there, his suit jacket draped over his arm, the top 2 buttons of his dress shirt undone. He no longer possessed his usual cold, noble aura. Instead, he looked rather pathetic and disheveled. He waited from 500 until 700. The sky turned completely pitch black, yet he still hadn't waited long enough to see her come out. Halfway through, his executive assistant called to report that 2 more partners had requested to terminate their contracts, and the company's stock had started to plummet. Vance Foster hung up the phone, his expression growing darker by the minute. It wasn't until 800 that the side gate finally opened. Amy walked out, holding a document folder in her hands. CEO Foster, this is what the miss asked me to give you, Amy said, handing the folder over with a calm voice. Inside are all the cooperation contracts between Sterling Holdings and the Foster Group, along with our declarations of termination. Miss said that we should part ways peacefully. From now on, we go our separate ways. Vance Foster didn't take the folder, staring fixedly at Amy instead. Where is she? Tell her to come out and talk to me. Our miss doesn't want to see you. Amy paused for a moment before adding, CEO Foster, back at the hotel entrance. Our miss gave you 5 hours. During those 5 hours, you had countless opportunities to open the doors. You were the one who didn't know how to cherish them. It's too late to say anything now. After speaking, Amy placed the folder on the stone ledge next to the gate, turned around, walked back into the courtyard, and closed the side doors. Vance Foster stood rooted to the spot, staring at the tightly shut gate. The cigarette in his hand burned down to his fingertips, the sudden heat making him flinch. For the first time in his life, he tasted the feeling of utter powerlessness. In the past, he had always been the one leaving others out to dry, waiting for them to bow their heads. Now it was his turn. He picked up the folder and got back into his car, flipping through the documents page by page. Every single page clearly laid out just how deeply Sterling Holdings had infiltrated the Foster Group, the corporate empire he had always been so incredibly proud of was, in Chloe's eyes, nothing more than a chessboard that could be flipped over at any given moment. Reaching the very last page, he found a sticky note clipped inside. The handwriting was neat and piercingly cold. CEO Foster, I gave you the rules. You were the one who refused to follow them. Vance Foster crumpled the note, his knuckles turning white. He remembered the way she had held up 3 fingers at the wedding, smiling as she said, 5 hours. At the time, he just thought she was being overly audacious. Only now did he understand that it was the absolute final deadline she should given him. He was the one who had walked himself into a dead end. The next morning, Chloe's father found out about what had happened at the wedding. He was so furious that he smashed his teacup and grabbed his coat, fully intending to march over to the Foster estate to settle the score. Chloe blocked him at the door of his study. "Dad, don't go." She stood at the doorway, her voice perfectly calm. "It's not worth it. Not worth it." Her father was so angry. His chest was heaving. "That bastard Vance Foster dared to bully my daughter like this, and I'm not going to let him off the hook. 5 hours. How dare he?" "Dad." Chloe looked at him and spoke slowly. "There's something I haven't told you. Sterling Holdings belongs to me." Her father froze on the spot, the coat in his hand slipping to the floor. He knew about Sterling Holdings. He knew it was the most prominent capital investment organization to emerge in the last 2 years. But never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that the person at the helm was the very daughter he pampered in the palm of his hand every single day. "The Foster Group's capital chain has always been in my hands." Chloe walked over, picked up his coat, and brushed the dust off it. He wanted to use this marriage to take the Sterling family's money and plug his own financial holes. But he severely miscalculated. "I've already handled everything regarding this matter. The Foster Group won't be able to hold on for much longer. If you go knocking on their door now, it will only give them ammunition to use against us. It's not worth it." Her father stared at her for a long time. His expression shifted from shock to astonishment and finally slowly morphed into overwhelming pride. He raised his hand and patted her shoulder, his voice dropping to a deep, resonant tone. "Good, very good. You truly are Richard Sterling's daughter. I'll listen to you on this. The Sterling Corporation will completely sever all ties with the Foster Group across the board. Anyone who dares to do business with the Fosters will be making an enemy of the Sterling family. My daughter's dignity will not be trampled on in vain." With her father's words, Chloe had absolutely nothing left to worry about. Over the following week, the Foster Group's situation deteriorated rapidly. Their stock hit the daily limit down for 5 consecutive trading sessions. Banks demanded repayment. Suppliers blockaded their doors, and their collaborative projects were suspended one after another. The entirety of Bayview's high society was watching the Foster family become a laughing stock. Those who used to orbit around Vance Foster now avoided him like the plague. Vance Foster worked day and night scrambling for capital, but all avenues were completely blocked. Any capital institution with even a bit of weight politely declined upon hearing about the Foster Group's projects. He later found out that Sterling Holdings had put out the word. Anyone who dared to take over the Foster Group's mess would be directly opposing Sterling Holdings. Unsurprisingly, no one dared to offend them. Lauren Blake, on the other hand, came to the company every day to stay by his side, bringing him soup and water, comforting him with a gentle and soft voice. Initially, Vance even felt warmed by her presence. That was until one day he accidentally overheard Lauren on the phone with a friend out in the hallway. Her tone incredibly smug. "Of course I did it on purpose. I went to the hotel first thing in the morning and instigated Vance to leave her baking in the sun. What woman could endure that kind of humiliation? Once she made a scene, the wedding was guaranteed to be ruined. Now that the Foster Group is in trouble, I'm by his side every day, and he'll only remember how good I am to him. Once the Foster Group gets through this, won't the position of Mrs. Foster be mine?" Vance Foster stood around the corner, his entire body turning ice cold. He had always thought the wedding incident was his own idea, that he was the one who wanted to establish the rules. It turned out that, from the very beginning, he had been played like a fiddle by Lauren Blake. She was the one who had added fuel to the fire. She was the one who had accurately calculated Chloe's temperament. She had single-handedly directed that entire play, pushing him into an abyss of eternal damnation. He walked over. Lauren hastily hung up the phone, her face draining of color. "Vance, why are you out here? Get lost." Vance's voice was steeped in ice. "Vance, please, listen to me explain. I told you to get lost." Vance raised his hand and swept a nearby vase to the floor. The shattering sound was deafening. "Lauren Blake, why didn't I realize before just how scheming you are? The wedding incident was your doing, wasn't it? Lauren's eyes turned red and she screamed back, "In your heart, it's obvious the one you like is me. If my family hadn't fallen on hard times, the position of Mrs. Foster would have originally been mine. What the hell is Chloe Sterling anyway? She just has some filthy money." Slap. A sharp sound rang out as Vance slapped her hard across the face. "And what the hell are you to even be worthy of talking about her?" His eyes were filled with absolute disgust. "At least she is open and honorable, unlike you, who only knows how to play dirty tricks behind people's backs. Get out of my sight immediately. If I ever see you again, I'll make sure you can't survive in Bayview." Lauren clutched her face, looking at him in disbelief before bursting into tears and running out. The office finally fell quiet. Vance slumped down into his chair, closing his eyes, his heart overflowing with regret. He was wrong, so terribly, outrageously wrong. He couldn't distinguish true intentions from false ones. He had treated a venomous snake like his guiding moonlight and treated a priceless treasure like dirt. He had single-handedly pushed away the one person who could have pulled him up, yet kept the one scheming against him right by his side. It was too late to say anything now, but he couldn't just accept it. He wanted to see Chloe. He wanted to apologize to her, to beg for her forgiveness, even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance. He wanted to try. After Lauren Blake left the foster group, she tried to latch on to other wealthy second-generation heirs, asking matchmakers everywhere for connections. But once the news spread, no one dared to take her. Everyone in their circle knew she had offended CEO Sterling of Sterling Holdings. In less than half a month, she found it utterly impossible to survive in Bayview anymore and could only return to her hometown in disgrace. Before leaving, she even tried to find Vance to demand some money, but she couldn't even get past the company doors. Evil brings its own retribution. Chloe didn't dwell on it. Her focus was entirely on her work. Sterling Holdings was bidding for an overseas tech project, which was their most critical endeavor for the second half of the year. A week later, the Bayview Financial Summit was held at the Exhibition Center. This was the highest-profile industry event of the year, where all the major players in the capital circle would be present. Vance Foster had called in countless favors just to secure a single admission ticket. Yes, he knew that Chloe would definitely be there. On the day of the summit, he arrived very early, standing at the entrance of the venue to wait. At exactly 900, Chloe arrived wearing a black velvet suit and stiletto heels. She walked in shoulder to shoulder with several industry titans. Amy followed, closely behind, holding a stack of documents. In stark contrast to her disheveled state on the day of the wedding, Chloe's expression was now icy, her commanding aura fully unleashed. As she conversed with the billionaires beside her, she was composed, calm, and naturally adept. People around them turned their heads one after another, whispering about the mysterious female boss of Sterling Holdings. No one associated her with the pampered heiress of the Sterling family, who had been left to bake in the sun for 5 hours outside the hotel doors. Vance Foster stood in the crowd, his heart suddenly tightening as he looked at her. He had never seen her like this before, radiant, sharp, and shining with an overwhelming brilliance. This was the real Chloe Sterling. She wasn't the gentle, understanding heiress of the Sterling family, but the houndsman standing at the absolute pinnacle of the capital world. He walked toward her unconsciously, wanting to call out to her, but he only made it halfway before being blocked by 2 bodyguards. CEO Foster, please stop, the bodyguard said, their faces devoid of emotion. CEO Sterling does not wish to see you. The surrounding gazes instantly shifted toward them, filled with probing curiosity and mockery. Vance Foster stood frozen in place, his face burning. In the past, he was always the one keeping others thousands of miles away. Now, it was his turn to be blocked 3 steps away. He didn't even have the right to get close. He watched as Chloe laughed and chatted cheerfully with the others. From beginning to end, she didn't cast a single glance in his direction, as if he were merely an irrelevant stranger, perhaps not even worth that much. During the intermission, Chloe went out to the terrace for some fresh air. Vance Foster seized the opportunity. bypassing the bodyguards to chase after her. "Chloe," he called out to her, his voice hoarse. She turned around and looked at him calmly, exactly as she would look at an ordinary business partner. "Can I help you, CEO Foster?" Her tone was exceedingly polite and exceedingly distant, as if there had never been a marriage agreement between them, as if that 5-hour farce had never happened. Vance Foster's atoms apple bobbed up and down. 1,000 words choked in his throat, but in the end, he could only squeeze out a single sentence. "I was wrong about the wedding. I apologize." Chloe gave a faint smile as the wind tossed a few strands of her hair. "You're too polite, CEO Foster. The wedding has already been called off. Right or wrong no longer matters. It does matter." He took a step forward, his eyes burning with desperation. "Chloe, I was blind before. I was stupid. I was manipulated by someone else. I know I was wrong. Can you please give me one more chance? The Foster Group cannot survive without Sterling Holdings' support." "CEO Foster," Chloe interrupted him, her voice turning cold. "You're misunderstanding two things. First, Sterling Holdings policies cannot be changed with just one word from me. Business rules are business rules. The Foster Group no longer meets our risk control standards. Halting the loans is a standard operating procedure. Second," she paused for a moment, looking him directly in the eyes, "there are no more chances between us." "But why?" Vance Foster's voice carried a hint of lost control. "Just because of those 5 hours. I know I hurt your pride. I can make it up to you. Whatever you want, I can give it to you. Make it up to me." Chloe chuckled softly. "CEO Foster, what exactly do you think I lack?" Indeed, she lacked nothing. She had more money than he did. Her current status was higher than his. Everything he took so much pride in was fundamentally not even worth mentioning in her eyes. The things he could give her, she already possessed herself, and hers were even better. She stood up straight and adjusted her suit jacket. "CEO Foster, if there is nothing else, I will take my leave. Moving forward, business matters will be handled strictly as business. There is no need to discuss private matters." After speaking, she turned around and headed back into the hall, leaving him standing all alone on the terrace. After that summit, Vance Foster went completely crazy. He ran to the Sterling Holdings office building every single day. In the mornings when she came to work, he would be standing in the lobby holding breakfast, waiting for her. She would walk right past him without giving him so much as a glance. At noon, he would order food from high-end restaurants and have it sent up. She had the front desk return every single bit of it. In the evenings when she got off work, he would drive behind her, following her all the way to the gates of the old Sterling estate. He would watch her go inside before finally driving away. All of Bayview knew that the eldest son of the Foster family had lost his mind. He spent his days chasing after CEO Sterling of Sterling Holdings, acting so pathetic that he didn't even seem like himself anymore. As cold and arrogant as he was in the past, that was exactly how wretched and desperate he was now. Day after day, Amy would also report his whereabouts to Chloe, her voice carrying a hint of disdain. "Mississippi, he stood downstairs all morning again today. The security guards tried to chase him away, but he wouldn't leave." Chloe flipped through her documents without even lifting her head. "Pay him no mind. As long as it doesn't affect the company's normal operations, just let it be. But him stalking you like this every day isn't a solution either." Amy pointed out, "He'll stop after a while." Chloe's fingertips glided over the signature line as she signed her name. No one can keep pressing a warm face against a cold shoulder forever, especially not someone who's so used to standing at the top like him. But Chloe hadn't anticipated that Vance Foster's stubbornness would far exceed her expectations. One day in August, Bayview was hit with a red alert rainstorm. Chloe had worked overtime until 1,000 at night. When she came downstairs, she saw him standing outside the building's entrance, completely drenched. His suit was clinging to his body, his hair was dripping wet, and his face was terrifyingly pale. Seeing her walk out, his eyes lit up. He took 2 steps forward, but then stopped, afraid of repulsing her. "Chloe," his voice was hoarse, wrapped in the damp, freezing chill of the rain. "I have something I want to say to you. Just 5 minutes." Amy stepped forward, wanting to block him, but Chloe waved her off. Holding her umbrella, Chloe stood on the steps, looking down at him from above. Speak. The foster group can't hold on much longer, he said, looking at her with bloodshot eyes. I know I have no right to beg you, but those thousands of employees can't lose their jobs. Chloe, consider it me begging you. Please pull the foster group out of this. I'll do whatever you want. I can give you all my shares in the foster group. I can even work for you. Rainwater trickled down his chin. The man who had always been immaculately dressed without a single flaw now looked as pathetic as a stray dog. Chloe looked at him quietly for a few seconds before speaking. CEO Foster, back at the wedding, when I was left to bake in the sun for 5 hours while you were inside enjoying the air conditioning and drinking coffee, did you ever think this day would come? He froze. I gave you a chance then. 5 hours. Every single minute. Every single second was a chance. Her voice carried no anger nor any pity. You were the one who threw it away. There has never been a cure for regret in the business world. The foster group ending up like this today is the result of your own choices. And what about you? His eyes suddenly turned red, his voice rising. From the very beginning, you knew I wanted to use the Sterling family's money, didn't you? You watched me put on an act. Watched me act all self-righteous. Watched me shoot myself in the foot. Did you find it hilarious? Yes, I did. Chloe laughed softly. But CEO Foster, no one has the free time to watch you act. I agreed to the marriage out of respect for the relationship between our family's previous generations, and because I felt the foster group still held some value. But since you were absolutely determined to dig your own grave, I had no obligation to jump in with you. My time is very precious. I don't have the time to play your little game of establishing rules. After speaking, she turned and walked toward the parking lot. Amy followed close behind, holding the umbrella over her, not sparing him another glance. From behind came the heavy thud of a body collapsing onto the ground. Chloe's footsteps didn't falter. She simply instructed calmly, "Tell the security guards to call an ambulance. Don't let him die in front of the company. It's bad luck." Vance Foster had stayed out in the rain all night. He developed a high fever that led to pneumonia and was hospitalized. His executive assistant came to beg Chloe once, saying that even while unconscious, he was still calling her name and wanted her to visit him. Chloe didn't go. It was unnecessary. She wasn't a soft-hearted person. From the moment she endured those 5 hours of blazing sun that day, she never intended to look back. After Vance Foster was discharged from the hospital, he went quiet for a while. Some said he sold off all the real estate and cars under his name, scraping money together from everywhere to save the foster group. Others said he had completely broken down, staying home, drinking all day long. Chloe had no interest in asking around. Sterling Holdings' overseas project had entered its critical phase. Chloe was so busy her feet barely touched the ground. 5 months later, the project successfully landed and Sterling Holdings' market value doubled once again. She firmly secured her position as the absolute top titan in the domestic capital market. A celebration banquet was held at a private riverside clubhouse attended by many prominent figures in the industry. Chloe held a glass of wine, socializing with the guests. Halfway through the banquet, the clubhouse doors opened and Vance Foster walked in. He had lost a lot of weight with stubble lining his jaw. He no longer possessed his former spirited vigor. Instead, he looked weathered and haggard. He was wearing an old suit washed until the color had faded, holding a document folder in his hands. Everyone's eyes fell upon him and hushed whispers broke out. He walked straight toward Chloe and stopped in front of her. Then, he slowly bent down and placed the folder on the table before her. "Chloe, this is the transfer agreement for all of the foster group's shares." His voice was incredibly low, laden with exhaustion. "I am selling the foster group to you. I will cleanly handle all the debts and employee matters. You just need to take it over. You can set the price. Whatever amount is fine." The entire venue fell silent. No one expected that the once high and mighty eldest son of the Foster family would go this far. offering his own family's company to someone else while lowering himself to such a humble posture. Chloe picked up the agreement, flipped through 2 pages, and then set it back down. CEO Foster. The Foster Group is currently a complete mess. Why would I take it over? Her voice was perfectly calm. I have no interest in things that hold no value. His face turned a shade paler, his lips trembling. I know the Foster Group isn't worth much right now, but its assets and channels are still usable, as long as you're willing to take it over. I can work for you for free. I'll help you manage it until the Foster Group is back on track. I don't need anything as long as… He paused, raising his head to look at her, a final sliver of hope gleaming in his eyes. As long as you don't completely disappear from my world. Gasps echoed from the crowd around them. This was no longer just acting humble. It was practically begging. Chloe looked at him and suddenly felt it was all rather anticlimactic. The cold, arrogant man from back then, who felt she was marrying up and wanted to put her in her place, was now standing before her, trampling his own dignity beneath his feet just to beg her for a single glance. The contrast was stark enough, but she had long since stopped caring. She set her wine glass down, picked up a napkin, and slowly wiped her fingertips. Vance Foster. For the very first time, she addressed him by his full name. Do you think that just because you've gone to these lengths, I should be moved? He said nothing. She looked him straight in the eyes. On the day of the wedding, baking under the sun for 5 hours, I didn't cry, and I didn't make a scene. I waited quietly until the very end. During those 5 hours, I figured something out. In life, there are many things you can compromise on, but dignity is not one of them. When you trampled on my dignity back then, you should have thought of today. Even if you trample on your own dignity now, it won't change anything. I don't need your company. I don't need your apology. And I certainly don't need your pathetic groveling. She stood up, looking down at him from above. As far as I'm concerned, you are now nothing but a stranger. I hope you won't bother me again in the future. After speaking, she turned and walked toward the terrace, leaving behind a dead, silent banquet hall and Vance Foster standing rooted to the spot. The river breeze blew in, carrying the dampness of the water. Chloe leaned against the railing, gazing out at the myriad of city lights turning on in the distance. Amy walked over and handed her a glass of warm water. Mississippi, are you all right? I'm fine. Chloe took the glass and smiled faintly. I just feel it's all rather meaningless. The harder it was to let go back then, the calmer I feel now. Those 5 hours of humiliation weren't meant to be exchanged for his regret and groveling later on. They were meant for me to see clearly that there is no need to wrong myself over unworthy people and situations. I have my own career, my own life, and everything I could ever want, whether it's men or marriage. They have never been necessities. Down on the street below, Vance Foster walked out. He stood beneath a streetlight, looking up toward the terrace. He stood there for a very, very long time. Finally, he bent down, picked up the agreement she had left on the table, and slowly walked away. His lonely silhouette looked like an abandoned dog. Later on, the Foster Group inevitably went bankrupt. Vance Foster sold off his entire fortune to pay off all his debts and left Bayview. No one knew where he went. Some people pitied him, saying that if he hadn't caused that incident in the beginning, he might very well be the boss of Sterling Holdings by now. But others said he got exactly what he deserved. He had a perfectly good life, but absolutely insisted on digging his own grave. When Chloe heard this gossip, she was in the middle of reviewing the reports for a new project. Her fingertips glided over the data without a single ripple of emotion. In this world, there had never been any what-ifs. He had chosen to assert his dominance, chosen to humiliate her, and chosen his precious first love. So he had to bear the corresponding consequences. As for her, she chose her dignity, chose her career, and chose to cut her losses in time. Therefore, she stood at the absolute pinnacle. It was completely fair. The sunlight from outside the window spilled in, falling onto the back of her hand, warm and bright. She remembered the scorching sunlight on the day of the wedding, blazing and searing, but it had also completely sobered her up. People shouldn't overestimate themselves, nor should they underestimate others. The humiliation you force upon someone else will one day, in one way or another, return to you in full. And as for Chloe, she would never, ever stop moving forward for anyone. When someone disrespects you, the best revenge isn't arguing. It's walking away and reaching a level they can't touch. His arrogance cost him everything. What did you think of her ruthless comeback? Drop your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.